say something before your anger gives you courage. A lot of times we are the most passive, cowardly human beings until our anger has compounded to an extent that we go off on someone and stand up. And we're like, oh, well, he deserved it. And I was like, nah, dude. Nah, he didn't. You just weren't handling your own emotions.
From Tuple, this is Distributed, where we show how world-class engineers and their teams tackle the challenges of remote work. I'm Jack Hanna, your host. Let's get to the real work. Hey everyone, we're excited to have Callie Buruchara on the show today. Callie is a senior software engineer at Uplift Agency. She's the founder of Majority of Work, where she hosts a podcast and mentors other developers. She's also the co-creator of firstpromo.dev, where she helps developers get promoted. So we're really excited to have Callie on the show. Callie and I originally connected over a shared passion for creating content, and I was immediately took by how thoughtful she was, how much Callie really cared about helping other people. So Callie, we're psyched to chat today, to learn from you, and to share your message with our audience.
Awesome. Thanks for that generous introduction, Jack. Yeah, super happy to be here.
For the folks who do know you, your specialty is the people stuff, right? Soft skills, people skills, communication skills, the stuff that, in your words, fills the majority of work. When did it really dawn on you that developers could benefit from this type of support?
So I'm a career transitioner. I used to run international service projects. I used to be a high school English teacher, and non sequitur, I'm now a software engineer. And coming into that, I just felt like, dang, I didn't take things apart when I was 4. I'm so behind. I have nothing to offer this technical world. And so first I felt like all the other skills, I didn't think of them like people skills, but I'm just like, all the things I've already learned, I'm in a deficit. But then I started working as a software engineer, and I realized just in my own personal experience that the things that make life hard or slow or annoying have nothing to do with JavaScript. It has to do with people being themselves. And so I found that I was like, oh, this is actually really helpful. And then I think people on my team started noticing that about me. And so I was the person that several people on my team would go to when they're like, hey, I'm mad at this colleague. How do I tell them I hate them, but like respectfully? And I'm like, use these words. And they're like, great, thank you. Or how do I tell the manager they never listen, but respectfully? And I'm like, do this. And then I'd also see people, my team, other teams were clearly like, there's no humility here on my part, but I'm like, they are so much better than me technically. Like, it's just so glaringly obvious. But my career was going better than theirs. And that was kind of weird. And so I think I just kind of noticed, like, well, what is the difference? I have a very pattern-seeking mind. So I'm like, okay, sure. Well, clearly it's not about JavaScript. And just noticed how I'm like, oh, our boss likes me more. Why does our boss like me more? Well, because I handle conversations this way and you handle conversations that way. And that's about it.
Was there a specific moment where it really clicked for you that this was something that you were good at and something that you could help other people with?
I have a good friend named Missy who we work together at New Relic, and she's also one of the most affirming people in the world. I love her. But she would just say stuff like that. If she'd ask me for like, hey, how do I rephrase this? I'm like, oh, I'd say this and remove this. Just that kind of happening with different friends over and over. They're like, you just make this look so easy. And I'm like, well, I don't think it's easy. I made the mistake before. That's the only difference. And so I think just hearing that over and over again, because I've got this very annoying trait where if I'm good at something, I think everyone's good at it. And so I'm like, obviously, you know not to say that. And they're like, no, I didn't know not to say that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I don't know until people tell me, honestly.
Yeah, I have a similar trait, so I can definitely relate to that.
It's the worst. We should stop doing that.
Yeah, agreed. Let's help the audience orient a little bit. What's the working setup that you're in currently at Uplift Agency as it relates to working in person, hybrid, remote, et cetera?
I am fully remote. It's a team of, how many are there? I'm going to go with 30. Let's say there's 30 of us. Most people are contractors. There are 4 or 5 full-time employees, of which I'm now one, and I feel very special for that. But yeah, they all live like in Colorado and Kansas and stuff, and I've never met them before. So they could be AI. We don't know. But yeah, it's all fully remote. And so I've never met any of them. Yeah.
And how about New Relic, where you were before?
It was also fully remote. Actually, even if you go as far back to learning to code, everything has been fully remote for me because I went to an online school and then I worked at New Relic, which was 100% online. New Relic does have some in-person people. And I think even before COVID, it was fully in-person maybe. But I joined when it was fully remote. My office was in Portland, Oregon. I live in Virginia, so not there. And yeah, Uplift as well has been fully remote. So never done hybrid, never done in-person. I am only a remote kind of gal.
What part of remote work do you feel like you've really nailed?
Oh, it's the thing that I feel good at and not good at. That's managing my time, where I feel like I'm good at prioritizing things, especially when it's very human-based, which it usually is like, this needs to be done. I need to stay long today. And it just is what it is versus like, I can wait till tomorrow. And just we have less inputs usually, and people are not as direct or clear communicators as we wish they were. They're not like, hey, this is this level of priority, which needs to be done by 2:45 tomorrow. Like, people don't really talk that way. I feel like I'm pretty good at figuring out or knowing how to ask and understand the nuance of priorities so I can fit my life well around that. So I'm like, oh yeah, I have time for a bike ride at 2 p.m. I can do that. Or it's like, no, there's no bike ride. Maybe tomorrow.
I feel like most people aren't good at that. So what makes you good at it? How did you get good at that?
I mean, it comes down to listening to people and getting to know how people talk differently than each other. Like, I've had a boss who will literally say, Callie, this is the priority. And I'm like, thank you. You are so easy. Love you so much. And there's other people who are like, hey, if you can get to this by the end of the day, I'd appreciate it. And that's their version of, this is the highest priority. You should not even like pick up a call from your mom. Like, nothing else is important. But it's just like, am I supposed to know that? So asking questions, making mistakes, and honestly going into every new relationship at work, knowing this person does not think like me. This person does not communicate like me. So I have to figure out how they communicate and how they think. And it'd be great if people came with manuals, or even if I could just ask, how do you think? But generally people don't even know. They're like, I think the way everyone thinks. And I'm like, no, you don't. You don't know that. Okay. May have to go the hard way. Figure it out the hard way. Yeah. It's a lot of observations. I'm working on a new team right now, and everyone's great, but they're all very different communicators from my last team. And there's one person who's very direct. I'm like, yeah, if he needs something, he's going to say, I don't have to check on him, nothing. Versus somebody else, like, he's just more of a passive communicator. He'll never be direct or demanding, or like, he communicates through stress, not through authority. That I know, well, what's most important to him is his stress being relieved. So I have to listen to the way he talks about things stressing him out. And that means that's the priority. So
clearly you have a process down for how to engage with this. And just, I think hearing you talk about it gives folks insight into the attention you pay to the way that other people communicate.
Lots of attention.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important, right? Like, makes other people feel seen. It demonstrates a level of respect that allows you probably to work much better with your colleagues than you otherwise would.
Yeah. And I think I would also hasten to add, there is a negative side to it where I think I pay too much attention, and I probably care too much to the detriment of other things, where my poor husband, his name's David, and I'll just be like super stressed. And he's like, well, but you finished your part, right? I'm like, yeah, but I think this person is implying I need to do more than that, though. And I didn't. And he's like, but they didn't say that. I'm like, yeah, but I'm pretty sure they're implying it. And he's like, well, then you should just leave it until they ask. And I'm like, that is logical, but I reject it. So instead, we're going to be stressed about it. And so that's something I'm working on, because I'm a highly sensitive person. I have ADHD. I just pick up on things other people don't. And sometimes I pick up things that don't belong to me, and I need to learn to put those back down. And like, maybe they are trying to imply things, that they also need to grow up and be an adult and say what they need. And just because I can infer doesn't mean it's my job to. So that's something I'm still trying to figure out.
How do you find that balance?
Precariously and with lots of trial and error. I think part of it is paying attention to my mental health about it. It's like, if I'm just stressed to pieces, like, well, this isn't very practical. This isn't a good path. And so another thing too is I need to remember that me inferring or me trying to mind read is actually a disservice to that person because it's teaching them that it's okay. And so I have to go a little bit into like my former teacher self where I'm like, is this the lesson I want to teach them? They can like passively say one sentence in an obscure Slack channel and I find it. Therefore, I know what's going on. No, I don't think I should reward that behavior. But it's also like, is it my job to teach and shape people? No, it feels like it is, but it's not. So there's just a lot of different variables there.
Do you have a set of principles that that guide the way that you think about this stuff?
There are certain things, certain values that I would say I think of a lot because they're contradicted a lot. One is the truth is inherently valuable. I do not lie ever. I mean, maybe accidentally. But it's like, oh, well, you should just lie to your boss. I'm like, oh, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I might not volunteer something, like totally.
Sure.
I don't have to bare my soul. But like, oh, do you like, your skip level? No, I think he's a jerk. I don't have to answer that. I could just be like, why do you want to know what I think about him? It's fine working with him. That's true. But I'm not going to like tell you my personal diary thoughts about him. Yeah. So the truth being inherently valuable and seeking to be really honest. Like, I'll give you a very clear example. So with someone on my team right now, we have very different communication styles. He's a wonderful person, but I just find it very difficult to communicate with him sometimes. Like, we can be saying the same exact thing, but it sounds like we're disagreeing. And I'm like, how did we get here? What's going on? And I sometimes feel like the way he communicates, it feels like he might think I'm not super intelligent. And I'm like, I feel like I'm pretty intelligent. I think I am. I usually don't question that. And so, yeah, we just have different communication styles. But he's also very affirming and like, I love working with you. I think you're really great. And so I'm like, that's confusing. And so actually right before we started doing this call, he messaged me and he's like, by the way, I think you're doing a really great job. Da, 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 da. And what I'm realizing is he's stressed about us meeting deadlines. And I'm interpreting that as him blaming me. He's actually not doing anything about me, but I'm just, because I'm insecure about what he thinks about me, I'm assuming it's about me. So after this podcast, I'm actually gonna send him a message and be very honest and say something to the effect of like, thank you so much. I'm really glad it's going well. To be honest, the deadlines don't bother me. I just don't want you to be frustrated that you have to work with me. As long as you're good working with me, I can stand anything. Because I don't think he knows that, because I come across very confident and I'm actually not as confident as I come across. So all that to say is like, I want to be not only like honest in the sense that I don't lie, but I like to take the risk of being even vulnerably honest, because that strengthens the relationship, which even strengthens the working relationship. So that's something I try to do a lot too.
Do you think that's easier in person or remote?
I would say there's pros and cons to both. In person is easier in the sense that you can generally have more opportunities to build rapport and have more meaningful conversations. But it's also harder because it's scarier because they're right freaking there.
Totally.
And you can't run away. What's nice about Zoom or Riverside or whatever it is you can limit the inputs. Like, I can't see your entire body language right now. I can only see you like your neck and up. So it's like, are you like tapping because you're nervous? Like, there's just other things that you can be doing that will give me input. Like, oh, he doesn't want to be talking to me right now, or he thinks I'm super annoying, or he needs to go. But I'm like, I don't know. He's just looking at me. That's all I got. So like, having less input can also make it easier to have the hard conversation. So in summary, I'd say in person makes it easier because you can build rapport, but the scary conversation itself can sometimes be easier over remote because there's less input and you're not in the same room as them.
That makes so much sense. I never thought about how less input can actually make certain conversations easier. Because my normal mental model for this is one of the challenges of remote work is the fact that the communication is lower fidelity. You have less input, it's harder to build rapport, et cetera, et cetera. But for those difficult conversations, you can't get distracted by them. You can't get in your own head about them. And I would also add that when the conversation's over, you don't have to walk out of the room and back to your desk together either, which has...
Yeah, you can just be like, bye, end. Yeah.
which has myriad benefits. And so I hadn't thought about that before.
I also like, even though I'm very, very loud, I'm very introverted. And so I really noticed the difference level of like, man, I can talk to this person for hours over Zoom, but in real life, it's like 30 minutes. Then my social battery is like all the way down. And I think it's just less inputs, and there's less that my brain is processing.
So you've had the chance, Callie, to work for a handful of different companies, plus mentor and coach a number of different software developers. I'm sure you've encountered plenty of situations yourself and with the folks that you've worked with that didn't go exactly as planned. And I'd like to dig into a few of those if you're up for it. Maybe we could start with a specific story where a team dynamic or a specific relationship really broke down.
So before I worked at New Relic, I built something called Horus, which is an open source observability platform. And I worked on a team of 4 brilliant engineers, all wonderful guys. And there's one person on that team. I was call him Jack. Your name's Jack. We'll call him Joe. We won't call him Jack. So Joe, great engineer, but again, one of those people where we just do not communicate the same way. It's just like absolutely opposite. Just like, why would you ever think to make the UI that way? That makes 0 sense to anybody. And also just very different communication styles. I try to be very nuanced and try to adapt. And he's just very like, this is what I think. And I'm also very emotional in the way I communicate. Like there's lots of like humor, I'll be very sad or whatever. And he's just like very stoic. It's like, I'm like, this dude doesn't even have emotions. And so other people on the team, I found it frustrating to work with him too. And I found it very frustrating to work with him. And I kind of tried over and over again. And he had a lot of suggestions that he wanted to make on different things. And usually he was right, but I also just found him annoying. So I found ways to dismiss all the things that he said. And I could be very persuasive. It is a pro and a con. And so I would just convince everyone that he was wrong, I was right, and we should do what I wanted to do. But I like consoled myself where I was like, I'm doing it for the team. This is for the product. But really it's just because I have an ego. And so this kind of kept going on and on until we were wrapping up the finishing touches of our UI. And he came up and we like kind of did a demo for like the whole team. And he was like, this looks unprofessional. And I'm like, rude. Like the colors are off. All these things are off. I think we should change all this. And I just cut him off like mid-sentence. And I was like, yeah, we're not going to do any of that. None of it. And normally he would either keep being like, well, but I really think, or he would just go silent and sulk. And so I expected that. But instead, he just kind of like sat back and he had a facial expression I'd never seen before on him. And he looked really, really hurt. And he was like, I don't feel like I'm allowed to be a part of this team anymore. And I don't understand why. And I was like, oh, heck. That was me. That was me. And like, I was just like cold water, man. And I can't remember what I immediately said. I probably was just like, but in the course of the conversation, eventually, and it was like all 4 of us were there. The other 2 were like, mom and dad are fighting. This is uncomfortable. But it basically came about that he had no idea that he was so irritating to me or other people because I had never told him. But instead, I was like, I think you're annoying. Obviously, you're annoying. I will base my life on those premises. No one had ever told him that his communication pattern was a little bit abrasive sometimes and that we were tired of the feedback. And he just thought he was just trying to make everything better. And, we were trying to make something so we could help ourselves get jobs. And he just had a lot of anxiety about that, which manifested as perfectionism and all this stuff. And so I ended up apologizing and I was like, you are 100% right. I did that. Like, I'm really sorry. And he's like, it's okay. I wish you would have like said something instead of, I don't know, just kind of butting me out of stuff. And I remember thinking like I was being so direct, but I was being very passive aggressive. Like I would conveniently forget to invite him to meetings, or I would just not respond to his messages until they were conveniently outdated, didn't matter anymore. But I'm like, oh, I'm telling him how I feel. But like, no, I was not. And so thankfully it all worked out in the sense that like I apologized, and he forgave me, and everything's fine, and we built the project, we got jobs, and it all worked out fine. But so many of my actions were the breakdown of that entire team. And if he hadn't said anything, if he had just continued to let me be my annoying self, like, I'm not sure I even would have learned that lesson. So I'm super grateful he said something and called me out in such a vulnerable way. He wasn't like, you're being a total jerk. He's like, I feel like I'm not allowed to be here, which is a very invitational way to have conflict, right? That was a painful lesson, but I learned it, and now we're here.
It sounds like that was a situation where you didn't end up giving feedback initially in a way that could have benefited you. What's your top tip for folks who are in a similar situation? They're clearly feeling friction in a relationship with somebody else that they're working with, but haven't done anything about it yet.
The first principle is say something before your anger gives you courage. A lot of times we are the most passive, cowardly human beings until our anger has compounded to an extent that we go off on someone and stand up. And we're like, oh, well, he deserved it. And I was like, nah, dude. Nah, he didn't. You just weren't handling your own emotions. And so I always tell people, I told someone this, a junior software engineer this last week, where emotions, especially negative ones, when they are ignored, they are only compounded. The only way for feelings to go away is you have to process them or express them. That's it. Ignoring is not an option. That only just like a pressure cooker just keeps going down, down, down. So if you're mad at someone, if you resent them, it's going to come out sometime. Like you gotta do something with that. Maybe go to therapy, like many of us. I go to therapy, or just like talk to them, dispel some of the tension. But bringing something up and having a conversation before it's a big deal, man, that heals a world of hurts. I've worked with a team that it was just completely broken down, where it was kind of similar to me and my teammate, just very different communication styles. And it had gone on for so long that at the end, when I was talking to both of them, he was willing to kind of keep working on it, but she was like, I just never want to talk to him ever again. And I'm like, fair. But if we had addressed this a month ago, it would have been fine. Like we could have just talked about your different communication styles. You would have understood. But at that point, she was so personally offended and deeply hurt by his communication pattern, which to be fair, was very abrasive, that she's like, I can't move past it. And so we think that we can just ignore stuff, but that makes it worse and even makes bigger issues. And then we have to have like a dun, dun, dun conversation. And we can't just have like a quick little 3-sentence Slack message. Like do the 3-sentence Slack message, like start there. So, yeah.
What can we do about that to prevent folks from getting to the point where their anger starts giving them courage?
Honestly, the first thing is we all just need to grow in self-awareness. I've worked with some engineers, and usually it's one of two responses when they're telling me about a problem with their manager, their colleague, whatever. And I can tell it's a deep-seated emotional problem where they have lots of resentment, lots of anger, lots of hurt, and they just refuse to acknowledge it. And when I bring that up, it's usually one of two reactions. One is like, oh my God, you're so right. Like 100%. The other one is like, seriously, we're going to talk about emotions right now. I'm here for JavaScript help. And I'm like, listen, okay, I know my husband's a therapist, but still, I'm still right. People just like, well, they'll just dig in and they're like, no, it actually has nothing to do with that. It actually is a spread. I'm like, okay, well, this conversation is about to go nowhere. And so it's just a humanity issue. Is we don't like to sit with things that are uncomfortable or difficult. But if I have to unlearn my childhood patterns of avoiding people who make me mad and feel hurt, yeah, it's a lot harder than a JavaScript tutorial. But it's also going to take your career a lot further. But there's pain. So I'd rather just call it a JavaScript problem and call it a day.
It's convenient to think about things as technical challenges because it's so much more tangible for so many people. And I think part of that's because as a society, we don't spend a lot of time teaching people how to reckon with and understand their emotions. Like social emotional education is not in most curriculums that I've seen. No. You're a teacher, you know that, or were a teacher, I should say.
Yeah. I also love surprising people when they're like, oh, you just are really good with people. And I'm like, no. This is hard-won skills. I come from a very passive-aggressive, we either have a tantrum or we ignore bad things kind of background. Like those are my default settings. And my life was just wrecked by that. Not only my professional life, my personal life. And it was just so hard. And I was like, well, I don't want to be this way anymore. And I had wonderful mentors in my life, not only to help me, but also model for me, where I'm like, that's how I want to handle conflict, or that's how I want to give people feedback, or that's how I want to respond when someone hurts my feelings. And again, just those were the skills that I brought in that people are like, how did you go so fast from a new engineer to software or to senior? And I'm like, I just do those skills everywhere over and over again. I'll joke in some of my LinkedIn posts that I'm like, you should have great people skills, even if you're completely selfish. Like, this is for your benefit. Like, even if you just only want to think about yourself. Now, I personally think that being selfless and caring about other people is a reward all its own. That gives you a lot more joy in life. So still recommend that. But I'm like, even if you just want to be completely about yourself, just listening to people and mirroring what they say and remembering what's important to them, and even just realizing you're not the only communication pattern option in the world that is reasonable or logical. I mean, there's those few things will take you pretty far.
Yeah, well, if you think about the different vectors on which you can excel, it's just another one. Like, regardless of whether or not you think it's more or less important, it's like the technical skills is a vector and your communication people, soft skills is another vector. And if you can do both, surely you will be more successful. It's pretty hard to argue with that.
Just math.
I'd like to switch gears a little bit. What's been the toughest part of being remote for you, especially acknowledging that your career prior to being a software engineer was so deeply rooted in being in person in teaching?
I mean, I do think there are like a very detailed piece that's been hard is written communication, right? There's no tone of voice. What do these emojis even mean? I don't even know what they mean. Everyone means them differently. It's very confusing. Even just like outside of my regular job, just working with like majority of work or first promo, all people that I work with that, in my opinion, have very different spoken communication and written communication, which confuses the heck out of me. I really try to align mine. Like when people meet me, I want them to be like, yeah, that makes sense. That tracks. Which actually sounds online. But some people I'm like, oh, this is so different. So I think that's been hard because it's not even like you have like a human that I have to understand, but I have to understand like the two different versions of you. Or like, okay, they wrote that. They sound like they're mad. They're not mad. If they said that, they would be mad, but they're writing it, so they're not mad. That's confusing. I think I don't know. Maybe they're mad. I should call them and figure it out. I don't know. So it's kind of just further, I don't know, nuances of communication there. I would say something else that's been hard is the feeling of loneliness sometimes, where I'm an introvert, love being alone, but sometimes I just want like someone to work next to me just so I don't feel alone with this problem. JavaScript hates me. I just want to feel less lonely. So that's something I used to do a lot at New Relic with, again, my colleague Missy, where we'd be on Zoom most of the day sometimes where we're not talking, but we're just there. And if I have a question, I just unmute. And I'm like, Missy, can I ask you a question? She's like, hold on, I'm writing this test. And yes, what's your question? Right? And we can share things and go through it. And I really, really miss that, of having that with Missy. And I'm sure there's something similar in person. I've just never experienced it. But yeah, I'd like that.
Yeah, it reminds me of a recent LinkedIn post that I saw you do where you were talking about how you spent all day or half the day trying to write tests, unable to write a single passing test for something that felt like it should have been fairly easy to do. And then in a short pairing session with your boss or manager or whomever it was, you were able to learn a lot and get to a place where you could actually write that test, though it did sound like ultimately it took a lot longer than you expected still. And the message I think you were trying to convey was that it's easy to become isolated and not ask for help.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's something that maybe shows up a little bit more in a remote context than it does in person when you're sitting side by side.
Yeah, because I do think there's a lot more weight to sending a message and saying, hey, do you have time? Versus me being here and being like, hey, Jeff, you got a second? Like, it's so much easier. Or Jeff could even see me struggling and be like, you okay? I'll be like, because I'm a very expressive coder. That's not already obvious. And so he probably already know that I was struggling because I'm sitting there looking like I'm struggling. And so, yeah, it lowers the barrier to entry, and you can even overhear something that maybe they're working on that's similar. I remember I was studying American Sign Language in college, and my professor talked about how, like, it's not just language for deaf people, but it's an entire culture. And there's so many things that are different about, like, I'd say hearing American culture versus deaf American culture. But one of the things is deaf people can't overhear things. Like, so I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, you can't go to the mall and overhear what someone thinks about a movie or overhear about a great deal at this place. And so the deaf culture, it's really important to explicitly share beneficial information. And I think about that in the same way of, like, there's no overhearing anything. There's no like, oh, did you hear that they said, like, okay, yeah, there's no gossip. I guess that's good. There's still gossip though in the remote world. So, but there's no like good overhearing of like, oh, I saw this person talking to this person, or this happened. Did you hear about this? Or even just, oh, I heard Chuck say this about this new JavaScript feature and I Googled it. Now I know about it. Like, there's none of that. Communication has to be a lot more intentional, which I think there are benefits to that, but there is so much value in unintentional communication that we just no longer have access to.
Well, it sounds like you had that with Missy through what you were doing with her.
Yeah, I did. Hey, Miss Missy. She's really great.
How did that come about? Whose idea was it to start doing that? And how did you navigate that social dynamic? Because it could feel like a big ask to say, hey, let's hop on a Zoom call all day together.
Yeah. At this point, Missy is like one of my closest friends in real life. So now it's very easy, where I'm like, Missy, I need 7 hours of your time. She's like, okay, I've expected this. But before that happened, I think a lot of it, like, the first thing I noticed was we had these check-ins at the end of the day, which I do love. And it's not just like, what did you do today? But it's like a random question. And not just like, what's your favorite color, but like, what's something people don't know about you, or if you go anywhere, like on a flight right now, where would you go? I just like getting to know. So I'm a huge fan of that kind of stuff. And I mentioned in one of those that I'm an HSP, which is a highly sensitive person. And most people have no idea what that is. And that's fine, but that's what I am. And Missy commented on it. She's like, oh, I am too. And I was like, I have never met another HSP. That's crazy. And so we just kind of bonded over that. And so I would just honestly find excuses to, like, if there's a possibility Missy can help me with this, I'm going to ask her. Yeah. And I think we'd just get on calls together and we'd both be just like, we don't really want to stop talking, but we need to work. And one of us would just be like, well, I mean, you can like debug that and I'll just be here working on my own thing with, like, if you need help, I'll just be here on mute. We're like, okay. We're both just like very like that awkward early stage friendship where we're like, I don't want you to think I'm annoying. I don't think you're annoying. And so we just kind of did that until we're both like, yeah, we really like each other. It's fine. We'll just be on call for 7 hours.
Okay. So that happened fairly organically. What advice would you offer to somebody who maybe wants a similar setup, but hasn't gone through that organic, slow rolling process that leads to them happening or finding themselves in a 7-hour call with a colleague where that sort of interaction can take place?
Yeah. In general, when I'm trying to figure out how much to trust someone, I talk about sometimes on LinkedIn the feedback litmus test, where I give people a little bit of feedback, see how they respond, and then try to get more and more. I also do that when making friends with someone of like, if I tell you this and it's important to me, how do you handle it? Okay, what about if I give you this? What happens if I give you this? Oh, you threw that away. Okay, we're not going to go further than that then. It's good to know. I think some people are really guarded, or they're just like, I'm going to tell you my entire life story right now. And I'm like, not healthy. Sorry, don't do that. It's very bad. You're just going to make yourself feel bad. Trust me, I've done that and I feel very uncomfortable afterwards. So in the same way that even building up time is like, what's the purpose of the time? Do you need someone literally just to debug and you just want technical help? Then you can work with someone who's a jerk and it's fine. Just don't share how insecure you feel. Just don't do that. But if you're like, well, no, I want like a buddy. Like I want someone I can like emotionally resonate with, then you should go with someone that you know you can emotionally resonate with. And so a lot of it comes down to being honest with what you want and what you need. And, you know, I would, if you already meet with someone and you kind of like vibe with them, I would just say like, hey, I listened to this podcast with these random people named Jack and Callie, and they talked about how you could just like sit on a call together for an hour and work together. I want to try it. Would you mind trying it with me? Hey, use us. We will be your people. We'll be your wing man and woman.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
It's good to have an excuse or something else you can point to so that it doesn't feel like your idea. It just feels psychologically safer to blame that or put that on somebody else. I like that.
Yeah, it's our fault. It's our fault.
Yeah. What clues should I look for to understand whether or not I too am somebody who should really invest in improving my soft skills?
Well, my first answer is I think everyone needs to improve, like including me, even though I teach on it. Ways to figure that out are a bit trickier. It depends on your level of self-awareness, and that's also like a very loop thing, because like how do you know if you're self-aware? It's hard. It's very difficult. I would say that good ways to figure it out are to get feedback from other people. But then the caveat with that is you need to have proven yourself to be someone who is open to authentic and real feedback. Because if people are scared of you, they're not going to tell you anything. Or if they just don't like you and they just don't feel like it's worth their time, they're just going to be like, you're fine, dude. Why are you asking me this question? Why are we talking about this? But finding multiple people from multiple directions to ask specific questions. So what I mean by multiple directions is like, it's great if you have a manager, someone above you, someone who's a peer. If you have direct reports, you could do it under you as well. But also like in your personal life, because this really affects your entire life, right? It's not just about your work. And maybe the people in your personal life be more honest with you. So asking questions like, again, blame Jack and Callie, of like, hey, I listened to this podcast by Jack and Callie, and I'm trying to figure out, don't say if, don't use that word if, say how I can grow in my communication patterns. I know I need to grow. Say that. I know I need to grow, but I'm not quite sure where. What do you think? And genuinely, please be honest with me. Because if you're like, do you think I need to grow? I feel like I'm fine. That is a conversation ender. Do not say that. But if you're like, I recognize the need for growth, even if you're lying, it's okay. In this case, you can lie. Like, I need to grow, but I don't know how. What do you suggest? And then do everything in your power not to react negatively when they honestly answer that question. They're like, well, you kind of interrupt people a lot. And you're like, what? Like, no, shh. Say thank you. What else? Thank you. What else? And then go get mad somewhere else. Go like lift weights or something and work out your aggression. So it's important to have multiple angles, because you could talk to one person who just like slices you 74 different ways and you feel like a terrible person, but everyone else is like, no, you're kind of all right. You just kind of, interrupt people sometimes. That's kind of annoying. That's it. Like, you want to have a balanced perspective. Because there are some people who will take the feedback and it will pierce their heart. And that's how I am. But you still want it, but you need to balance it. There's other people who are like, that sounds stupid, and it'll just roll off your back like you're a duck. But like, we both you need some balance there. And growing in self-awareness is really just being aware of how you actually impact other people and how you actually interact in this world and how you actually influence people in your sphere. And so there are people sometimes who are like, oh, I'm super self-aware. I just disagree with what everyone says. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how that works. That's not how that works. I'm sorry. But yeah, I do think, when people are like, everyone just responds to me in a negative way, or everyone just kind of seems up in arms, or everyone just seems so defensive around me. If everyone seems defensive around you, you are the common denominator, respectfully. And so you should figure that out.
Before we wrap, one final question I had for you is, what's one question that you have about remote work that you don't have answered yet?
I know how to build rapport remotely, but how to build rapport so easily as it is in person. Like, how to really transfer that experience, because all the things that are hard, like feedback and difficult conversations and people think you're stupid or people you think they're stupid, like all those things are made smoother by rapport. But I think it's easy to do all the rest remotely, but building rapport, that's hard. It'd be nicer if it was a lot easier. So when people are like, how do I make friends remotely? And I'm like, I got some tricks for you, but just know it's going to be hard either way.
What's the hardest part for you?
I think it's making things that are spontaneous, not spontaneous. Like one of my favorite ways to, I guess, befriend people in real life is I like externalize my thoughts out loud. So if you're like in a long grocery line and everyone's in a pissy mood, I'm trying to lighten it. And I just like turn to like the old guy behind me and I'm like, well, I'm about to turn 75 here in a second. And he laughs. And it's like, it's spontaneous, but like, how am I supposed to do that online? Or you're just in a long meeting, or rapport comes from a lot of spontaneous, organic interactions. And when you're remote, you inherently are intentionally interacting with someone. So you can be very meaningful. So it's good for deepening relationships, but that initial, it's kind of like, can I talk to you for like just 5 minutes and just make jokes about the weather so you know that I'm funny and that's all we talk about? Like, you can't really ask for that. That's kind of weird.
Yeah. And when you do that at the start of a meeting, you're also taking up the meeting's time, right? Because
yeah, you're making some people really mad.
Totally. What's one thing that you'd hope listeners take away from this conversation?
I don't know if I said it, so I'll say it now, but that soft skills, even though they're harder to perceive, are just as, if not more learnable than all your technical skills. So no matter your default settings, no matter how you're like, dang, I'd love to be that way, but I'm not. It's not how you're born, it's how you choose to become. And so you can learn anything.
I love that. And if folks want to learn more about your work or connect with you directly, where should they go?
Yeah, so best place, probably LinkedIn. Callie Buruchara. There's only one. It's just me. And if you want to email me instead, it's just callie.buruchara@hey.com. See you.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Callie. A pleasure catching up. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. You too, Jack.
Thanks for joining us on Distributed. If you want to learn more about what we covered in this episode, or if you want to share your own thoughts, follow @Tuple on X or visit distributed.fm.